Mrs. Toedtman, what it's like to you to be back here at Ball State?
It's like a dream that I've had for many, many years. It's a beautiful dream, and yes, a sad one in a way, because I have memories of my mother telling me how father and she left Ball State when it was the Eastern Indiana Normal School at that time, you know. He had poured into this wonderful administration building his dreams and his plans and everything that he could get his hands on financially. He had inherited about $20,000 from his father, who was a well-to-do farmer down in Butler County near Hamilton. And because of the disappointment that he felt so strongly about not being supported by the Muncie natives and residents who had brought him here, he went on with what he had to work with. But I think his dream mostly was realized that was worthwhile was the fact that he went out into the countryside and looked for students who were worthy, not only that they were worthy academically, but they were very poor and not able financially to pay for their schooling, and those were the very ones that he wanted to bring into the college and to help to have an education. And he thought that he could not only help them to get an education, but he could build this wonderful administration building.
Now, he designed this. You're holding the.
He designed this himself.
Now, what is this picture? Is this something that he drew?
No, this has been drawn by a formal architect that evidently he asked to draw after he had made the plans and had drawn them up himself. He was evidently a man, because later on he proved he was a builder. He built up a great deal in the northeastern part of Dayton after he left Muncie. But
your father did?
Yes.
Now,
he laid
poured
out
a great deal of his own money into this
it was
building.
over $20,000 at that time. That must have been a fortune. But he was so in love with this area and with the dream and of the school and the plans that he had, and felt that he would finally win the support of the Muncie residents as they had promised, but evidently didn't.
Did this make
finally.
him a bitter man?
No, he wasn't bitter, but he was very quiet about it, Jim.
Disappointed?
He was very heartbroken. He left here a heartbroken man. But he was so beautiful a person. He was never did I ever hear my father. He never would talk about Muncie unless it was brought up. And I never heard anything except wonderful thoughts, beautiful thoughts about the school, how proud he was that it was developing and growing. But he would rarely speak about it, and there were very few people who knew that he even had any connection at all with this school.
Now, this is his picture. How old was your father when this picture was taken?
I think he was about 44, 45 years old. He was born in 1854, and this was around, evidently around 1897, 98. So that would make him about 44, 45 years old.
How long was he president of Ball State?
It was, I thought for a long time it was 5 years, but I don't think it was that long. I think it was more like 4 years that he was president. And the 1898 to, was it 1902 or 3? I'm just not clear about that.
Did you go to Ball State?
No, I went to Otterbein College. I went to Otterbein, where both my father and my mother were graduates, and my grandfather Bender on my mother's side of the house, mother's father was treasurer of Otterbein College, so that was and mother grew up there, and that was a natural place for, and that's where she met my father.
But your mother was head of the School of Music
She was head of the School of Music here, and mother had studied, well, of course she was also head of the music school in Avalon College, where my father was president for 11 years.
Before coming to
Ball State, and had established that school. They had moved it from Avalon to Trenton before he left, and in one of his letters I read that he was very thankful and happy that he left Avalon free of debt. And so he only left the school, I suppose, because he felt that there was a challenge here and a future here. Now, my mother was head of the music department there too, because she was a concert pianist and a beautiful musician. She had a voice like an angel. She studied in the Boston Conservatory, and the year that they took off, they took a year what do you call this? Sabbatical
Yes.
leave. I remember Mother telling with such joy how they went to Europe and studied together. Father went to the University of Berlin. He had a PhD at that time, and I thought he received a PhD from Berlin University, but maybe I'm mistaken about that. Nevertheless, Mother studied at the Karl Schawenke Conservatory in Berlin for that year. And of course they traveled and they had a lovely, lovely year. But you see, she had a beautiful background for her musical connection with the school. And
Did your father ever return to Ball State?
not that I know of. I don't believe he ever came back. If he did, I'm not aware of it, and there was never any reference in the home about the college and what happened here, except through my mother. And once or twice I remember my father talking about the college, because he'd been questioned about it, but there were very few people that knew he had any connection here whatsoever. He was so modest a man. He was a very loving man and a sensitive person, and I think he was quite true to character, that he would be absolutely quiet about what he had achieved here before he left.
Is this the first recognition?
I think so.
Does this please you?
Makes me very, very happy. I'm so happy. I can't believe that it's happening. I mean, in my old age, I didn't think. Now my son, I'm so happy that my son is involved today with this and has met these wonderful people at the college, because John is a tremendously educated man. He has his own school of music. Am I repeating myself? No. In Madeira, and he has a faculty of 12 people and over 300 students now. He's very young to have achieved this in 3.5 years. He left the conservatory as a teacher. He was getting his degrees and teaching there, but finally decided he just had to be his own man. So he found this location in Madeira, where they also have a lovely new home now. It's not new, it's an old new home that is a wonderful place for their 2 little boys to grow up.
He inherited his grandmother's talent.
Oh, he did indeed. He did. And they used to sit at the piano. I have pictures of them sitting at the piano together. She adored him because he was, he was who he was, and he was her grandson. But he was so talented. He played with the Dayton Symphony Orchestra when he was 16 years old. He studied abroad, and he's had all this background that has made him. But I think perhaps he's found his fort, although in his school, because he loves his teaching, but he also loves, his first love is his playing, I think.
Do you know, many people believe that had it not been for your father and the infusion of his personal wealth of some $20,000, we may not have had a university today.
I'm so appreciative of your saying that, Jim, because I wondered too. I even said to Mrs. Petty said that to me today when I was sitting next to her at lunch today. She said, she said, I just wonder if there would have been a school here if it hadn't been for the wonderful administration building and your father's first efforts, because there were years there between where there were many failures, I think several, and then there were also years when the Ball brothers were not able, where they were having industrial problems and they weren't able to endow the school like they did. I think my father must have gone to them. I don't know this to be a fact, but I can't help but believe that he must have tried to have secured financial help outside. And it was at a period when there was a great deal of I think, unrest and trouble, and Mrs. Petty reminded me of that today, that financially they just weren't in a position like they were later on, you see, to take an interest in the school. But I like to think that it's because that school stood there, that they looked at it, and that was one of the things that they thought they could take a great interest in and make this community something of a special kind of a learning center.
You know, your father was also an an educational visionary, in that you said he went out literally into the cornfields to
Indeed, he
reach
did.
to the students.
And my mother used to go out with him, and she would sing at the churches and give little programs to interest the students and interest the families in trying to help these students, you know, to come from the outlying parts, the farmlands and the countryside. She went right with him. And I think there's a story about how there was seldom a group of students that came to Muncie who would not be met by my father in person. He would make it a point to go to the railroad or wherever they were coming in, and to greet them and to welcome them. And I'm not surprised, because it would be like my father to do that.
Yes. And you know, that's true of our new president, Dr. Anderson.
I have been delighted. Oh, I've had such a lovely 2 hours or more with Dr. and Mrs. Anderson, and I'm just delighted to be able to meet them and to talk to them. They are so down-to-earth, real people. That's what I fell in love with.
And he reaches out like your father did.
Yes.
I've seen him with the students.
I'm not surprised, and I'm so happy for you to tell me that, because that's what this school needs. Any school needs it. Any school needs it. There are schools where you can go, a student can go 4 years and never have a personal word from the president, and can feel like they're just a number. I know, because I know.
That personal touch is
yes,
important.
It's so important.
Well, I would like to say that rather than you being honored, we feel honored that you came here and shared your day with us.
I think I am overwhelmed. I didn't realize that there was going to be an entire day. I thought we would meet Dr. Anderson and have a brief talk and have some conception of what they had in mind about my father's picture. I'm thrilled. Did you know? I'm going to be able to commission my father's picture to be painted, his portrait to be painted, and there's some plan to dedicate it together with some of the other presidents. But he was the first one, we'll have to remember, won't we?
Yes, indeed we will.
And I hope that it'll help for the school to remember that he was the first one.
Thanks to you, we have greater insight into the man who
He
helped make Ball State what it is.
He was so modest and retiring, and yet so magnetic. He was one of these men that would walk into a room and everyone would want to know who the man was. But he was so quiet and so very retiring and modest. Yet he had that wonderful strength that comes from that type of a person, you know,
yes.
with such vision.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for asking me to be with you. I really hope that I want so much to do my father justice, and my mother, because she must have been a very special person in his life, whom he needed and whom he appreciated, you know, to work with him.
I'm sure.
Thank you again so much for having me here.
You're certainly welcome.